Well, good afternoon, folks, and welcome. Why don't we go ahead and, I know there's a lot of folks that are still standing in the back of the room. Go ahead and take a seat, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. It's like a church. You guys all got silent. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Presidential Distinguished Lecture Series. We're really honored to have our speaker here today. We had a great chance to connect with her earlier in the day as she gave a presentation related to artificial intelligence here on campus and had a really nice lunch today. We're honored to be able to have Dr. Marcia McNutt here in our presence today. We're fortunate to have her with us. She's the president of the National Academy of Sciences, and she's been doing that for a long time. She dedicates her time to thinking about some of the biggest questions that are facing American science. Where are we strong? Where are we falling short? How do we stay ahead and rebuild trust along the way? These aren't abstract ideas, but questions that shape our collective future. And I won't pretend that the state of sciences in America is simple these days, or that these questions are easily answered. What I do know is that universities like KState have the responsibility to be in a conversation like this today. As you all know, we are a land-grant institution. In Marcia, we are the first operational land-grant institution. We're here to do research that matters, work that tackles real problems and serves real people. That's in our DNA every day. Before I hand things over to Dr. Rice, I want to acknowledge someone very, very special in the room, Dr. Barbara Vallon. If you can please stand so that we can recognize you. As I think you all know, she is one of our university distinguished professors and also another member, our only other member, of the National Academy of Sciences. Dr. Vallon's work on crop diseases and biosecurity is precisely the kind of research, critical research, that we need more of. Barbara, we're super proud of you being a part of the K-State community and grateful for all of your contributions to our research enterprise. We also, I would say, this past weekend had an opportunity to be in Washington, D.C. for another National Academy, the National Academy of Medicine, where Jürgen Richt was inducted as a member this year, and we're incredibly proud of him, and he now serves as the only active National Academy member for Kansas State University. I'd like to turn the program on to Chuck Rice to be able to introduce our keynote speaker of the day. Thank you, Chuck.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see you all here. It is an honor to be on this stage to kick off our second Presidential Distinguished Lecture Series presentation. And what a better way to kick off this second lecture with Dr. Marcia McNutt, who's been a leader in this area that shapes science policy and research at the highest level of government, academia, and industry. So as president of the National Academy of Sciences, Dr. McNutt has led the nation's most respected scientific advisory body, the National Academy of Sciences. And I had the pleasure of working with her, I served on the board on Ag and Natural Resources for 13 years, 7 years as chair, and so a lot of the paperwork, although we didn't meet often, it was the paperwork exchange for signing off on different studies. Prior to her position as president of the National Academy of Sciences, she was editor-in-chief of Science, director of the U.S. Geological Survey, and was president and CEO of the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. She's a geophysicist by training and trailblazer by reputation and trusted voice on the future of science and innovation in America, which will be your topic this afternoon. Today, Dr. McNutt, as President Linton mentioned, she'll take a candid look at the state of science in the U.S., where we've been, and where we might be headed, and what it will take to remain a global leader of the U.S., and of course the academia is part of that. is this conversation is particularly timely this year and speaks directly, as President Litton mentioned, KState, as we will be the next gen land-grant university, pushing towards the bright future of engagement, research, and impact. Dr. McNutt.
Well, thank you very much, Chuck, for that introduction, and it's wonderful to see so many people here today. It's really a pleasure to be visiting KState because it was in 1863 that Lincoln signed in the same year the Charter for the National Academy of Sciences and the legislation that led to the creation of land-grant universities. So both of our organizations go back now more than 160 years. And those two pieces of legislation are considered some of the high point of Lincoln's time as president, other than, of course, winning the Civil War. But those are very strong contributions he made to America today. So I am going to talk to you about the state of science in America. Let me warn you from the beginning, this is not necessarily going to be an uplifting lecture, but hopefully it will wake a lot of people up to the fact that reputation lags reality. And if we don't catch up with what the reality is, it's going to be too late. So first of all, we all know that US is a science powerhouse. This is a plot of Nobel Prizes in science. So it doesn't include the Peace Prize or Literature Prize, but it includes economics as well. And the US has more Nobel Prizes in sciences and economics than the next 5 nations combined. That's an amazing record, but it was not always the case. A lot of people today, don't realize that the US was not always a science powerhouse. Prior to World War II, if you wanted to study science in school and were going to take a foreign language, you took German. You took German because German was the language of science. So, as I say, Germany led in science pre-World War II. They were winning the Nobel race at that time. So what happened to change it? Well, the first thing that happened to change it was Hitler rose to power. And the German Jewish scientists immigrated to America. That's how we got Einstein. That's how we got Teller. That's how we got a lot of these other wonderful scientists who helped us win the war. But we didn't stop with just getting the German Jewish scientists. After the war, there was this project called Project Paperclip. And the objective of this was to bring both German and Austrian researchers to the US to seize German technologies, mostly rocketry, post-war. And Germany was viewed as being well in advance of the US, including an aircraft. And the view of the leaders of this nation at the time was that it wasn't good enough to just read their papers. We actually needed them to jumpstart our rocketry program, a program that eventually got us first to the moon. And this began as a short-term advisory project, and it ended up with the permanent immigration of these scientists to America, even some who had collaborated with the Nazis. So it wasn't necessarily a non-controversial project. And then the next big thing that happens is, first of all, we imported these immigrants. They got us jump-started, but then this report was written. Vannevar Bush was Roosevelt's chief scientific advisor, and he wrote this report, Science, the Endless Frontier. He argued for investment in basic science by the federal government. He said it was technology that won the war for the Allies, and that continued investment would bring other benefits to the American people. that were worth the national investment. It led to the creation of the National Science Foundation. It promoted science education and scholarships for young people. And he recommended that government partner with industry and universities in this. And it was the university part of this that really took off. So why do we care about America being a science powerhouse? Well, first of all, science is the best and perhaps the only method that humans have ever developed to reliably predict the future. Knowing the laws of nature, we can play it forward under different scenarios, different policy scenarios, to say what's going to happen. So here are some examples here. What does my DNA predict about future health challenges? Think of all the women who found out they had the BRCA1 gene and now have been able to take preventative measures not to get breast cancer. Or where will the storms strike and who needs to be evacuated? Just even the science of hurricane predictions has gotten so much better that it used to be, tens of miles of a coastline or hundreds of miles of a coastline that would be evacuated. Now we can pinpoint to much better accuracy and give the right people the time to evacuate. Or asking the question, how can I modify the structure of this molecule to provide novel, useful properties? These are the kinds of questions that science can answer to create new products to make our lives better. And these new products improve our quality of life. Look at the internet, or I'm sure everyone in this room has a cell phone that they use. And look at the number of people who have been helped through prosthetics and robotics to regain function that was lost through disease or war or some other tragic thing. So these new products improve our quality of life, and that's another reason why we want to be a science powerhouse. And economically, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics and medicine is where the markets are booming. If you look back in 1900, what the different share of the national economic marketplace was, you can see that rails dominated. But if you look at today, it's technology, industrials, health, all science-based industries that are booming. So that's where the US gets its economic might, is from its investment in science and technology. And STEM is also where the jobs are. STEM jobs have grown faster than non-STEM employment, and many of those STEM jobs don't even need a STEM degree, which is another wonderful part of it. It's training that can happen on the job. So you can see that of the total US workforce, the number of people in STEM outweighs those not in STEM, and it doesn't matter whether it's at a bachelor's degree or above, or even without a bachelor's degree, STEM jobs are booming. But now let's ask the next question. Obviously, science is an international, universal enterprise. All of you who are STEM researchers, you publish your work, so other people can read about your discoveries and they can benefit from them too. So why do we need to lead in science? Can't we just count on everyone else's science to make our lives better? Well, one area where we can't count on everyone else's science is national security. If we want to keep our country safe, we have to have our own STEM enterprise, because let's face it, Russia and China are not going to share their technologies with us. Another reason is for economic stability and growth. Being the first to capitalize on a new discovery gets you out ahead of the competition and allows you to benefit with the jobs and the economic opportunities that doesn't happen if other nations are the first to discover something and capitalize on it. There's also ethics and standards. For example, most of the world is metric. But if you're involved in the aircraft industry, everything is in English units, because America has dominated in the aircraft industry, and it's so our standards are being used. So we don't make the mistakes in converting from meters to feet. They make the mistakes. And so it's a benefit to us. But it's also in the ethics. We hear all these stories about how the nation of China has become one where everyone is being spied upon and observed at all times. There are standards that are set when other nations are in the lead that we don't necessarily want to have. And plus, by setting the standards, we can make everything compatible with what we want to do. And then the final reason why you want to be a science leader is soft power in diplomacy. There is so much goodwill that came back to the U.S. in the prior decades from the work we did in vaccinating children in Africa from diseases, the work we did in the Middle East to help them with water security, etc. This is a way to be helpful to other countries that doesn't involve war, that doesn't involve national defense, but it's a soft power type of science diplomacy. So this leads us to the question, how's the U.S. performing today in terms of being a science leader? I hope I've convinced you that there are advantages to leading, so how are we doing? Well, there was a very interesting report that the Academy put out in the year 2007 called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. And this report was to look at the current state and future prospects for science leadership in America. Norm Augustine chaired this committee, and this was an amazing report. For those of you who haven't read it, I urge you to go back. Even though it's almost 20 years old now, its predictions on the future were so prescient that it's almost scary. And what they predicted back in 2007 is in a world where advanced knowledge is widespread and low-cost labor is readily available, U.S. advantages in the marketplace and in science and technology have begun to erode. So in other words, cheap labor abroad and the wide availability of new knowledge is going to hurt U.S. leadership. And so they did a number of scenarios in this report. One of them was the business as usual scenario. So let's suppose in 2007, the U.S. just continues in its usual way of funding science at the federal level and nothing much changes. What they predicted back in 2007 was in business as usual, U.S. share of global R&D will decline. We will decline in our share. The share of world scientific input will decline. Share of scientists, engineers, in terms of the world population will decline. And we will lose our ability to attract the best international researchers because they will find opportunities at home. So let's see whether any of these predictions that were made in 2007 have actually borne out. So let's first at the first one, and that is U.S. share of R&D. 2007, when that report was written, I don't know if I can see, but 2007 is over towards the left side of that screen. And you can see in 2007, when that report was written, U.S. was #1 by a long shot in share of global R&D, by a long shot. And #2 was I think it was Japan at that point. So look at today where we are. China has caught up with us. So we no longer dominate R&D. And you can see that at the time that prediction was made, China was just beginning to ramp up, but was certainly not the powerhouse that it is today. So that prediction has certainly borne out. Oh, yeah, here we go. I already marked it for you. Rising above the gathering storm. Share of researches and publications has declined. What I love about this study is that this was done in Japan. It wasn't done in America. It wasn't done in China. It was done in a country that's friendly to America, but not America. And they looked at metrics such as number of researchers in industry, number of researchers in academia, number of researchers in government, number of scientific papers, number of papers in the top 10% of all of those published, number of papers in the top 1% of published. What you see is that China is first place now in all of those categories, every single one. And in one of those categories, the US isn't even second. All right? So things have definitely changed since 2007 when Rising Above the Gathering Storm was written. Okay, and our ability to attract top international talent has also declined. You can see that this plot shows the share of F1 student visas that request another status. So they want to, in other words, the number of students who want to stay in this country to work. Okay, they want to convert from student to stay here. The share has fallen by over 30% since 2007. You can see India is sort of level, but look at China, precipitous drop. The rest of the world and all nations, precipitous declines in the number who want to stay here. And it's because they have opportunities at home. So why not take advantage of them? Some of them have much better opportunities at home. So all of the predictions from the business as usual scenario in Rising Above the Gathering Storm have played out. We are no longer, however, in that business as usual scenario. We have now gone out of the business as usual scenario and into a second scenario that this report looked at, and that was the pessimistic case. So the pessimistic case, it was gradual erosion in business as usual, but the pessimistic case predicted that spending on other federal priorities would limit federal and state resources available for science and technology. So we would have competing demands that wouldn't allow us to maintain investment in science and technology. There would be increasingly attractive opportunities overseas that would draw away industrial R&D funding and talented US scientists from the US. So we've seen, so many jobs going overseas, even from American companies, but they're still hiring people overseas. And then finally, they predicted that excessive regulation of research institutions reduces the money available for active research. Does anyone here resonate with that prediction from 2007? All right, so let's see what's happened. Okay, other federal priorities limit science funding. This was the original budget for 2026, where you can see in the blue what the 2025 appropriation was, and in orange what the proposed funding would be for 2026. Now, we don't have all of these budget marks done yet. We are in a shutdown. We'll see what happens. Most of these marks will be better than what was in this slide. But you can see that National Science Foundation, much lower, NIH, much lower, really a lot of funding cuts there because of other priorities that the government has right now that don't include scientific research. They also predicted that attractive opportunities abroad would draw researchers away from the US. This is just a slide from 2024 up to March of 2025 that shows that interest in US jobs, the inflow and outflow were in kind of sync for a while until the results of the election came in. And suddenly now we see a huge exodus of US researchers to the rest of the world and a huge drop in the rest of the world sending researchers to the US. So that is a marked change. These curves are no longer in sync. They are absolutely out of sync. And then excessive regulations reduces research output. So this is from the Committee on Government Relations, or Council on Government Relations, that looked at the increase in the number of regulations that university researchers have to put up with. And you can see that it was back in the 1990, it was a couple regulations you had to deal with. Now it's up at 270. So that is a huge increase in a period of about 30 years. I mean, it's really amazing. When we look at this regulation, it's reducing researcher output and discourages researchers from pursuing science in the US. Researchers, a number of universities have polled their faculty and looked at their time and how they're spending it. They're spending 40% of the time that's not in the classroom just on regulatory compliance. These are PIs that are good scientists, and they're pushing papers. That's all they're doing. International students are abandoning hope of education in the US because they can't get a visa interview. Students from Western China are being asked to go to Eastern China for just an interview to see if they can get a visa. This is crazy. International students are accepting jobs overseas because they can't get a visa to stay in this country. Even those who want to stay can't stay. And the administration is prioritizing reducing regulatory burden, which is really a good thing. And that's why the Academy has jumped on this topic, because it's one that does resonate with this administration. They want to reduce regulatory burden, but it's not necessarily clear to me that it's regulatory burden of research that they're really focusing on. So we want to focus them on that. I was very concerned during the early days of the administration when Elon Musk was running the show, because his focus was on waste, fraud, and abuse. And I have never seen a focus on waste, fraud, and abuse that didn't lead to more regulation. But fortunately, he has been sidelined now, so maybe there's hope. So evidence suggests that we are now experiencing the pessimistic scenario from rising above the gathering brook. We're not even in the business as usual scenario. We have entered the pessimistic scenario. So for example, if we look at US global markets, they are now being dominated by foreign multinationals. You go back to the year 2000 on the left, and you could see that the US, which is the blue bar at the bottom, was the largest contributor to global markets. Now we've gone down, and China has risen to have actually a little bit more in terms of global Fortune 500 companies than even here in the US. And that, 25 years ago, if you had predicted that China would have more global Fortune 500 companies than the US, it would have been crazy notion. And this diagram, which you can't see, but all I want to illustrate is the colors. This diagram was done by the Australians. So it wasn't done by the Chinese, and it wasn't done by the US, but it was done by a country that's one of our collaborators and allies. And what you see in the second to the last column to the right is either China or US in terms of who dominates the science in various critical technologies. Technologies like advanced manufacturing, AI, energy, quantum, biotechnology. You see so few places where the US is still in the lead, and how many places China has taken over the lead. And on the right, it shows whether that technology is of high importance, medium importance, or low importance, and most of the cases where the US is still in the lead are medium or low importance, not the high importance ones. So this is certainly worth lots of concern. So I am going to propose today that we need to reverse these trends, and we need to reinforce US scientific leadership. Science, the Endless Frontier, gave us a 60-year runtime before the competition caught up. But they've caught up now. And I am going to venture a guess that we will not be able to outspend China in terms of funding science. I think we are at the point, the reason why we can't get any further ahead is that China's a much bigger country, it's got more people, it's got a bigger economy. We can't outspend them. But can we innovate to an improved research ecosystem? Because that's something that America does well. We innovate well. We come up with new ideas and new processes. When Vannevar Bush wrote Science, the Endless Frontier, that was a new idea, and it took a long time for the rest of the world to catch on. Now that they have, we need to innovate again. So what I started by doing was just a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What's going wrong with our system now? For example, in terms of strengths, we've got this culture of innovation, we've got the world's most highly ranked universities, we've got strong industry R&D, we've got the availability of venture capital, which is something that these other countries have never really developed a culture of philanthropy and availability of capital for new startups. We've got a strong return of investment on research right now. But weaknesses, poor science literacy. My God, if it weren't for these international students coming here, our K through 12 school system is really in bad shape. And if we stop getting the best and brightest from the rest of the world, if we don't improve our K-12 education system, we're going to be in deep trouble. And we're too dependent on immigration, we've got too many regulations, we have no strategy, blah, blah, blah. But there are opportunities. AI is an opportunity. Strong international science budgets means we can work with other countries to do things that we can't do alone. There's the value of science in all occupations, and right now we have this anti-regulatory agenda in the government, which we can take advantage of. So what I'm going to propose is we need to come up with Endless Frontier 2.0. We need to take a look at what has changed since Vannevar Bush wrote his report and how we can take advantage of those changes to come up with a new system that takes advantage of the current environment, not then. When Vannevar Bush wrote his report, no one else was investing at the federal level in science in any great degree, but now they are. That's changed. When he wrote his report, we didn't have all these foreign students coming to America. Now we do, and we know it's an international competition for these people. So there's a lot of things we can change. So let me start by building on this culture of innovation that we have in this country. How do we optimize investments to do more with less and have greater impact? So optimizing the money we're already spending. So one concern I have is that proposal success rates at the NIH and the NSF have been declining since my career started back in the 1970s. And there was a little bump there during the ARA, you know, the ARA investment in research, but it's dropped again. You can see that NSF has gone up a bit, but still pretty low. What my concern is that the peer review system is basically conservative. And when funding rates get into below 20%, what happens is people look for reasons not to fund something. And so I'm worried that high risk, high reward research, which we should have in any healthy portfolio of work, is not getting funded because it's too easy to find reasons not to do it. So I think we have to take a look at how we are deciding what we do and come up with ways that don't penalize high risk, high reward research. So in terms of mitigating the conservatism of peer reviews, there's all sorts of things we could do. For example, I was at a meeting in Japan and asked my colleagues from other countries how they decide what to fund. And one of the most common ways was that they know who the proven performers are. And they fund people who time and time again deliver. And we know people like that. You know, Bob Langer at MIT, how could you possibly go wrong giving money to Bob Langer? You know, he started 200 companies or something by this point. But we can only do that if we come up with a parallel way to fund young researchers who have not yet developed a track record. Because otherwise, if we don't do that, we are going to have a diminished research system in the future. And I think we have to monitor the impact of AI on peer review. Some people are, getting a paper to review, putting it into AI, asking AI what's it think. I think we have to look at that pretty carefully to make sure that we aren't getting sidetracked and that AI is not even more conservative than our peer reviewers. So I'm proposing that we launch an analysis of the pros and cons of various approaches to competitive selection of grants with the goal of spurring innovation. And we've already done that in this country. Groups like DARPA or ARPA-E are both examples of different kinds of funding mechanisms that look for high-risk, high-reward research. And I think we need to do more in that direction. Action number 2 I'm going to propose is to create a national research strategy. Basically, up until this year, the budget from last year largely determined the budget from next year. And the amount of money available for any one area of research was generally determined by what it was the previous year, unless there's some new money that's brought into the system to spur quantum or spur AI. I think we need to create a national strategy that doesn't just do whatever we did the year before, so we can really take advantage. And I think the current disruption of science budgets provides an opportunity to reassess what is most important based on evidence. And I'm going to argue that we need to have at least a base level of investment in everything, because you never know from where the next CRISPR-Cas9 is going to, to emanate. But there are some areas that we know for sure right now are going to be game changers, and others that are just kind of going along at their normal pace. And so we definitely need to make sure that we are reallocating funding for a strategy. So current state is there is no strategy. A better direction. China, Norway, Germany, and Japan all maximize their investment in R&D through strategic planning, primarily through an apolitical, non-governmental organization. And I think that's what we have to do here. Right now, the government is asking political appointees to sign off on all grants and contracts. I think that's not the right direction, because once we start politicizing what gets funded, we are going to miss out on some of those big opportunities and big discoveries. But if we instead have a rational process for doing it, we can provide long-term stability in key sectors, we can focus on innovation, and we can have balanced growth. And what I'm going to argue also is any U.S. strategy should involve all the major players. Back when Vannevar Bush wrote his report, government was the one place you were going to get funding to do research. Now, industry does 3/4 of the R&D in America. And any research strategy that doesn't incorporate industry is going to fail. Philanthropy. When Vannevar Bush wrote his report, there was no Schmidt Foundation, there was no Gates Foundation, there was no Moore Foundation, there was no Packard Foundation. Now we have, in fact, at U.S. universities last year, 50%, almost 50% of the basic research was funded by philanthropy. Now, philanthropy can't expand to make up for the loss in federal funding, but it's an important partner that has to be involved in these discussions. And I would say a national strategy needs to accommodate both basic research and science and technology for public good. So basic research, which is what the government tends to fund, is studies where the application of the result of the research is as yet unknown. So industry's not going to invest in it because there's no known way to make a profit from it. That has to be funded by the federal government until such time as it's clear where the profit motive is going to be, and then industry picks it up. Gravitational waves are a beautiful example of a discovery that was funded by the government over long term. We now have detected gravitational waves for the first time. Do we have a use for them? Not yet. But we didn't have a use for quantum science when that was first developed. And then it became the foundation of GPS. We wouldn't have GPS without quantum mechanics. Applied research, which is in the public good, should also be supported by the federal government. That's done both through universities and also through federal agencies. A good example, I show a hurricane here, is weather prediction. Do we want weather prediction privatized so that if you have two neighborhoods in New Orleans, one that is wealthy can afford to buy the private product, gets the hurricane warning and evacuates, the other neighborhood that can't afford to have it, they all die? No, you don't want it. The government, that's the government's responsibility because it's information and it's science applied for the public good. And as I say, industry is well suited to perform research where the application leads to commercial value. And as I already mentioned, we've got to improve K-12 education. We're going to be losing out on a lot of the best and brightest from around the world, and if we don't create homegrown geniuses, we're going to be in deep trouble. So, and this is not just about jobs. It's about creating the citizenry for the 21st century. And I would argue that all walks of life benefit from STEM understanding. Law, look at how much of law is involved with technology these days. Or business. I already showed you how many of the sectors depend on science in business. Politics, manufacturing, transportation. It's all about creating informed citizens who know how to use science in their lives and in their jobs. And they also know, they don't actually do science, but they know how science is done. So they don't think of science as a list of facts. Science is a process. It's an ongoing, never-ending process. So I would argue that education in America right now is mostly failing its citizens. These are the math scores from grade 4 and grade 8. And the blue line is the percentage of students that are below basic understanding in math at 4th grade and 8th grade. Red is they're at the basic level, and the yellow is those who are above. Look at the change from grade 4 to grade 8. How those who are in advanced, better than the standards, go from 40% to less than 30%. And those who are below the basic level go from 25% up to nearly 40%. We're making our students worse every year that they're in school. I mean, that's what this seems to say. Not good. So if we start with K-12 education, children are taught science as a list of facts. Teachers are burdened with large class sizes. Most teachers at the K through 6 level, so elementary school, became teachers because they hated science. And they really are challenged to even teach the content. So better directions would be to nurture the innate interest of children to explore the natural world around them. Don't sit them down in a classroom and teach them facts. Get them out on field trips. Have fun. Kids love that kind of thing. Explore AI as a tutoring aid for students who need help. AI has shown great success in this. Provide AI as a teacher's assistant to help them feel confident with the material, and support informal education programs in STEM fields. Most of these are at community science centers and aquaria and zoos and other places like that. So we need to support those as well. Action number 4, we need to build the domestic STEM workforce of the future. Our number one vulnerability right now is this dependence on foreign talent. And as other nations follow our lead, we are not going to get those people anymore. So we need to figure out how we are going to homegrown these STEM professionals. Now, the current rate of master's and PhD completions is insufficient to meet current demand for the emerging biotechnology sector. So these are not university jobs in basic research. These are jobs that require master's degree and PhD scientists in the industrial sector to lead in biotechnology. And you can see what the gap is in these different areas, the gap in molecular engineering being particularly large, and the demand being particularly large as well. And here's the declining availability of top international talent. This is a 12-month rolling average of net flows of top AI talent in the US. You can see that from 2011 to 2017, we were getting a net positive influx of AI talent coming to America. You can see that that started dropping with a big dip during the pandemic, of course. That's understandable. After the pandemic, it started to recover, and now it's down at zero. Zero. AI people don't want to come to America. The US STEM workforce overall is dependent on foreign students. This just shows on the top row for all science and engineering occupations, the foreign-born share of workers at bachelor's degree level is almost 20%. At doctoral level, it's 43%. 43%, that's almost half of our STEM talent. We're counting on people coming here from overseas. Where are we going to find that other 50%? This is a problem. So I think we need to rethink STEM paths to industry. When most of our university departments were created, it was back in the 1970s or 60s, the early heyday of science, the endless frontier. And all departments were vying to hire the same top talent to come. And so we were turning out students that would be the professoriate to fill these departments that wanted to build up their science workforce. That's not the case anymore. Now, most of the students who graduate go into industry. Most STEM graduates find jobs in industry. But a STEM research career typically entails 5 years to earn a PhD, several years of postdoctoral experience, all this at very low wages. These students are in their mid-30s or mid-40s by the time they get their first real job. And if you're a woman, think about trying to start your family in the mid-40s, because that's when you finally have some kind of financial stability. It just doesn't work. On the other hand, if you look at, I gave an example earlier today, my 3 daughters, none of them would become scientists. They all, after graduating from college, did 2-year professional degrees, went into business, went into industry, one started her own company, and one became an attorney. They all walked into 6-figure salaries 2 years post their bachelor's degrees. No one in science is doing that these days. So, well, or very few. So I asked the question, why can't we provide a 2-year master's type professional degree for students who aren't going into basic research, but who are instead going into the industrial sector? And one of my favorite examples of this is something called Keck Graduate Institute. It's the newest of the Claremont colleges in Southern California. And I got involved in it when this guy, Hank Riggs, came to me and he said, I've been talking to pharmaceutical companies about the graduates they're getting from university programs. And they say they get these graduates who want to run their own lab but don't know how to work as a team. He said he gets these people who have no idea how to do a proper clinical trial or how to get a drug through FDA approval. These are the skill sets we want. So Hank and this group of people he recruited came up with this idea for Keck Graduate Institute. That's a 2-year program for students that most of them have backgrounds in science, but some in engineering and some in business. And they all work together on teams and develop both the hard skills and the soft skills that are needed by industry. The students in that program, they aren't on government grants. They either pay their own way, though most of them get funding from the industries that want to hire them to go there. So many of them go through this program after 2 years debt-free, and even those who have to pay their way Every single graduate walks across that KGI stage with several job offers in hand. So I'm asking the question, why can't we do that in more fields? Why can't we do that in AI? Why can't we do that in biomanufacturing? Why can't we do that in material science? There are so many areas where industry wants these graduates. They want them sooner, and they want them with the skill sets that are needed for industry. And I don't even think you have to set up a new university. Here at KState, you could just set up a center. Set up a center that's a 2-year master's program. It calls upon the faculty from all over the university, and you can funnel your undergraduates into this program to get high levels of training for much in-demand jobs in industry. I think we also have to improve the academic career path. I mean, this idea of, 10 years before you get a real job. And the problem with that is, I think we're overtraining PhDs for basic research in academia. And the reason we're overtraining, let me contrast two different fields. One is chemistry and one is biology. You go to an ACS meeting, American Chemical Society meeting, and the students there are really happy. A third of them stay in research, a third of them go into industry, and about a third of them go into government. And they all have good jobs, and they all feel like, as soon as they get their PhD, they've got a job in hand. But in biology, because the workflows in the labs are so difficult and so time-consuming and require so many sample runs to get statistical reliability, that a typical PI in biology has 5 people working in the lab. That's the average lab. And it's got 3 graduate students and 2 postdocs. So that means that every single researcher is replacing himself with 5 people every 5 years. And the jobs in basic research aren't expanding. They aren't even doubling every few years, much less going up by a factor of 5. So I think we need to come up with better ways to run our labs using AI, using automation. We can get by with fewer students who have then much better job prospects because they don't feel that the market is being flooded by clones just like them. And then action 5, reduce red tape. I said it's over 40%. The latest estimate is 44.3% is time lost from active research to filling out forms. And so I asked the National Academy to do a report on this. This is the cover for it, Simplifying Research Regulations and Policies. This was a fast-track report that was done in like 2 months or something like that. And it provides a series of policy options to lessen the time researchers spend reporting and complying with the regulatory environment. And it starts with 3 principles. So all of these options are consistent with the principles. The first is that we need to harmonize these regulations across federal and state agencies because so many researchers will have some funding from the NIH for this part of the work, some funding from DOE for this part of the work, and that's double the regulatory compliance rather than having the same project submit the same forms to everyone who's funding it. The second principle was that you need to tier the requirements to the nature, likelihood, and potential consequences of risk. Right now, it's just black and white. If you do human research, you have to go through IRB approval. Well, I talked to psychologists who said, I'm just sending out a voluntary survey to a bunch of people in my state. They can fill it out or not if they want. And yet I have to get IRB approval to send out that survey. They're not injecting foreign substances into these people. So why does that need IRB? So this tiering to the risk is important. And then finally, using technology to increase the efficiency and simplify the process. This could be a great use of AI. If you put the proposal in and you put your research techniques in, it could probably populate 90% of these forms for you without having to, spend a lot of time filling it out yourself. Action 6 is expand access to international resources. So the best talent develops the best ideas, and the biggest projects require the most collaboration. So we need to share the burden and share the access. I remember when I was a student, Stanford had its own linear accelerator. Now, if you want to be state-of-the-art in particle physics, you need to be at CERN. You need to be at an international, because only an international consortium can pay for it. And we've already seen that U.S. scientists are the publication collaborators of choice. This just shows for various countries, as I said already, China is putting out the most publications, but they have many fewer international collaborators working with them on it. International scientists would much rather work with U.S. researchers, so we need to take advantage of that. And advancing the frontiers of basic research really requires them. As I said, you need international partnerships for high-energy facilities. Only international consortia can afford cutting-edge atomic research. But right now, the U.S. is applying an ideological lens to these foreign collaborations, and I'm not sure that's appropriate. They're also cutting facilities budgets that threatens access to space, the oceans, and the unknowns. This is, while I hate to see the budgets overall go down, the facilities budget has been hurt the most. And that is what we all depend on. We depend on those data facilities and those instrument facilities. And the U.S. is also systematically withdrawing from international partnerships. The NSF has told the Academy that they are no longer going to give us any funding for U.S. involvement in the various international unions that help coordinate work globally. And then finally, the last action is we have to rebuild trust with all members of the public. We certainly aren't going to get any public support for restoring science funding if they don't think that we're working in their best interests. And confidence in science, is shown in this slide from Penn, shows that confidence in science is rebounding from the dip we took during the pandemic, when people felt that scientists were flying blind and requiring things that in the end turned out to be unnecessary. And I think 90% of the problem there was really, really bad communication. I mean, if we had said to people, okay, wearing a mask, we can't guarantee, we don't know how this virus is transmitted in the early days. We don't know how it's transmitted. We think wearing a mask could help, but we can't guarantee it. But we know this is a no regrets action because no one is going to die because they put a mask on. They might die because they didn't have one on. And if we had proposed these as no regrets actions, I think we would have been in better shape. And of course, we actually, some of the decisions really hurt students and young people who we ultimately found were not at high risk. But trust needs to be re-earned. It can't be assumed or claimed. It takes a lifetime to build up a good reputation, and it takes one wrong move to destroy it. But the public does believe that science can solve many issues, from energy security all the way down to the cost of healthcare. They really think science is the key to a better future, but they have to trust us in it. So, and I think we can build trust with the public by, first of all, listening to them. Too often as scientists, we tend to lecture and we don't listen. To go into a group of people and say, what's your problem? What's really bothering you now? And then to tell them what you know that science is doing to try to address it. I've talked to so many scientists who say, oh, I just say to people, look at how much you love your cell phone. Aren't you glad that science enabled your cell phone? They take that for granted. Most young people today don't remember a day without cell phones. That's not something that's going to encourage them to trust science. But telling them you're dealing with the problems they do have now that haven't yet been solved, that's what's going to be the winning strategy. So let me just conclude by saying I think we need to consider an innovative Endless Frontier 2.0 if we want to regain the lead in science, because the data tells us that business as usual was already failing us, and that the US is no longer leading in key technologies. We're not producing enough homegrown STEM talent to meet the need, and it's becoming difficult to rely on immigration. So the opportunities are to spur innovation at home by coming up with new models for how we do science, to create a national strategy that includes all players, including industry and government and philanthropy. We need to improve K-12 education, which is easier said than done. So, don't think that I'm minimizing that. We need to rethink STEM pathways to make for better career paths for our students. We need to reduce red tape. We can benefit from international partnerships. But I think my main goal is I think we just need to make scientists nonpartisan again. Right now, it's the first time in my life when I see science as being a partisan issue. We have to make it nonpartisan again. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. McNutt, for the candid comments. I don't think you can retire. I think you need to lead 2.0. So with that, take questions.
Yeah.
There's 2 mics up here.
Yep.
Come on, somebody started off.
Yeah.
Mike.
I really appreciate your presentation. There's a lot of signs that China may be following some of the same direction that the U.S. did in terms of turning over on being that leadership.
Yep.
So one of my questions, I guess, is who or where do you think the next leader may emerge if China follows the U.S. in terms of increasing regulations and reducing input on the science?
Yeah, so you're right. I have seen some examples of cases where China is already encountering 2 of the major drawbacks we have. One is the regulatory, but also that they are overproducing PhDs, and they're finding that their PhDs are getting discouraged about their job prospects because if you have a lab that's doubling its size every 5 years, or doubling the number of researchers that need jobs every 5 years, you obviously can't make that happen. Or you can't continue on that route. So, it's interesting. Everyone is pointing to Africa as the future. I think it's a long way from being able to capitalize on it now, but Africa is where all the young people are. It's where people are hungry and eager to make their mark. And I think a lot of the developed countries are basically complacent. And I worry about that with America. If we're complacent about the role of science in our economy and the future of our children and grandchildren, we're not going to get anywhere. And I think Africa is that hungry place, and we might see future, it's not going to be in the next 10 years, but maybe in the next 30. Yeah, thanks for that question. All right.
All right, well, Dr. McNutt will be available for a few questions afterwards. I think she gave us some good ideas for the next gen land grant university with public-private partnerships. And Rich.
I do have one question.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
I was waiting for others, but. My question is related to the disinvestment in science that you showed early on in your presentation. I'm curious about how long of an impact do you think this disinvestment right now will play out?
Yeah. Okay.
And what do we need to do to regain it back?
That's a terrific question, because I get this all the time, and I'll tell you what I think. I think a lot of my colleagues in the academy, people in their 70s who have only known the current research environment, they think, oh, well, the Trump administration will be there for 4 years and then things will go back to the way they were. I can tell you, I don't think it's ever going to go back to the way it was. I think our only option right now is to come up with a better model, because the budgets aren't going to go back to the way they were, and I don't think I just don't think we're going to regain leadership if we don't innovate, because the budgets aren't coming back. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think we need that almost to motivate people to start making changes.
So then, as a university, how would you recommend we think differently?
Universities are already, I have talked to so many university leaders who are jumping on this industry-university partnership bandwagon. They are rethinking their conflict of interest rules with their faculty, so the faculty don't feel so ostracized because they're working with, this company or that company. And so I think that is a huge thing that's going to happen. And I think we also have to kind of relook at what some of this funding model, because we depend so much at the universities on indirect costs from federal research grants, and we're going to have to find other ways to keep state of the art.
Ernie had a question. So.
Just as a follow-up to the President's question, we were hit particularly hard when USAID funding was taken away, and I'd just be curious about your take about the likelihood that it returns in that form, likely not, but the concept of that action moving to state, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I do USAID funding, so much of it was tied up in the science diplomacy. Making friends for America abroad through providing access to products and services that they don't have. This has been so key in Africa, where China has actually poured the money to make the investments in infrastructure in those countries in a way that we haven't, but yet our work in science diplomacy was helping to offset China's hegemony there. So I actually think more thoughtful future administration might want to rebuild some of that USAID science diplomacy, but it's hard to say right now. I mean, the impact from that is probably, of all the things other than the tariffs, that has probably had more international impact than anything but the tariffs. Yeah.
Okay, I'll venture a question too, since the ball is rolling. In many ways, we've had the glass bead game for so long, the gaming of science, producing technical publications, perhaps not with an entire goal. Certainly the first 20 years after Bush, we had the space age, which really gave a lot of inertia. And science was relevant then, but very often we have a pejorative term. It's only academic, right? We gotta banish that. And I would suggest, from my experience, that if we involved more the industrial section in our universities, we worked together, and we not only had goals of producing journal publications, but actually producing intellectual property that would give more relevance.
So I'm going to go even further than you're suggesting. I think one of the most important things that universities can do is they can re-examine the academic reward system, because we have the most perverse incentive system in order to really do good, high-quality work. When people are being evaluated on numbers of publications, or numbers of citations for their work so that they actually write papers just to cite their other papers. You know, I mean, it's crazy stuff. This is all nuts. We actually need to, we need to reward people based on impact. And that impact is in, you know, new ideas, new products, new services, pushing back the boundaries of understanding. And that's not something that happens because you count publications or citations or look at impact factors of journals. This is all crazy, crazy stuff.
Thank you.
All right.
I know.
Let
We're
me
almost
follow
out of
up
time.
on.
We gotta-
Oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, right.
I'm getting,
You pointed a finger at us, saying scientists are our own worst enemies sometimes, with the peer review process being one example. I really endorse that thought, and I think as a journal editor, I saw so many papers being hammered for no good reason, because somebody thinks they're smart if they can find a reason to reject a paper rather than accept it. So anyhow, you pointed to the need for something like a new nonpartisan NGO to be making science investment decisions. To what extent do you think science professionals in the agencies can play that role? I think our national program leaders are being pounded now, and they're not being allowed to do the real role that,
Sure.
that they could do.
I think they can play a role, but I'll tell you, unless industry and philanthropy is also involved, you know, it's got to be a stool with four legs on it, because if we don't involve also industry and philanthropy along with academia and government, we're not going to get anywhere.
last question.
So here's one thing that nobody brought up and that came into our hands while designing a 2-year professional master's degree. So we went and talked to our PhD holding alumni who are working in industry, which are many, many, many. And you know, they were TAs, they still like the teaching thing, and they said, oh yeah, that could be put in there, but that is done already a research project. That's a PhD thesis. And I thought, you know, can we make it normal and have a structure where we can co-advise students with a PhD advisor in industry?
Yeah, I think some universities are already doing that. And as I showed in the demand is also at the PhD level as well as the master's level. But it's so many of these students are just not getting the right training for what they need in industry. And I think co-supervision with industry is a great way to do it. And I know some universities are already capitalizing on that.
I should give credit. This is done under a grant from the Academic Innovation.
Ah, good. Great.
Okay.
All right,
well,
thank you all
let's
very much.
thank
Great
Dr.
questions.
McNutt. I think she's given us a challenge for the administration. Hans, you got some work cut out for you? And the deans there. Dan, Brad, where else the deans? There, we got work cut out for us to do for KState.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I also think a lot of this is going to have to be done through like the AAU. I think if all the AAU universities held hands and said, we're changing the criteria for hiring and promotion, then it would spread all through the country.
All right, thanks again.